This is TWiT.
So you guys all heard about the vulnerability from the Apple iDevices, and recently there was a patch that actually fixed a couple issues here. And one of them is that they patched to make it harder for law enforcement to access locked iPhones. But also a less public fix is they fixed the code that caused crashes on certain iDevices when users typed the word Taiwan or received messages containing a Taiwanese flag emoji. Now, this particular vulnerability was essentially a denial of service attack, or what they call a null pointer dereference. Now, the odd part here was the defect was super easy to reproduce. All you had to do is go into iMessage, Facebook Messenger, or WhatsApp and type the word Taiwan. Now, before the patches, the security researcher Patrick Wardle wanted to find a fix for the issue, so he got to work. Now, iPhones notoriously closed nature when it comes to around bug challenges. Their software's closed; it's hard to find. Well, it helped to isolate the memory locations that store the dereference null pointer and a faulty instruction that calls it. And Wardle was actually able to restore the image to pull some of the code libraries, and he eventually found that the crashes were being caused by code that classified messages based on emojis that contained. Now, Wardle's traced the likely purpose of the bug code to documented iOS behavior that hides the Taiwanese flag from emoji menu or from being displayed on the screen when in the region set to China. Now, this is very interesting. So Apple blindly made a fix to appease a government, in this case China, and they changed the behavior too quickly. It sounds like they didn't have a huge QA process around this, and so they didn't have to lose business in China, and so they kind of deployed this patch so that that things would kind of go awry when you tried to type this emoji or even the word Taiwan. Curtis, I want to throw it over to you. Is this something that we're going to see more and more from electronic companies because they don't want to lose business in some big markets like China?
Oh, absolutely. As China comes to parity with and perhaps even surpasses the U.S. in terms of the number of consumers that are there, I think we will see many more people or many more companies that come up with fixes that are, let's say that they're kind to the Chinese government's sensitivities. I think the real question is whether they do this in versions of their product that are specific to the mainland China market, or whether they make these part of their general global distribution and just have them turned on when, as we've seen here, the region becomes that for China. And here's something else that I think is going to get even more interesting. We are probably no more than 5 to 10 years from China no longer being the most heavily populated nation on earth. India is poised to pass China. So that means we're going to have two huge population centers. India, in terms of its technological sophistication, is in many ways where China was probably 40 years ago, but it wants to reach parity. So over the next few decades, we're going to see this sort of thing play out in a lot of different regions on a lot of different topics. And I think it's probably going to play to extents we haven't seen in a long time with just how global any electronic product can be.
Right. So this is just a very simple example. Like you were saying, hey, like they just didn't want to see that text show up in any of their applications, so they kind of put a block in it for them. Brian, thrown over to you. You just as kind of off of what Curtis is saying, this is just the beginning. What we're going to probably see, it's not just text. It might be hardware requirements, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's actually not the beginning. It's more of the same. We're seeing it, in my experience over the last several years, government-approved cipher strings for TLS is a big example of that. So in Russia, the government requires GOST, their government-approved cipher suite. In China, there's SM2, which is now SM4. Now, these are the China national standard. And if you think the reason for that is because they want to eavesdrop, you're correct, right? That's absolutely what these governments want to be able to do. Is they want to be able to offer encryption, but they want to also be able to eavesdrop on their populace. So in order to do business in these countries, if you want to deploy some network equipment that supports encryption, you better support the government national standard ciphers. And so that's just one example of the type of compliance requirements that are going to be required of enterprise tech vendors in particular, just to be able to do business in these various countries. And these are huge amounts of dollars that we're talking about, especially in the enterprise. Like China is a huge country, but their enterprise tech business is really taking off over the last several years. And that's something where, every company from F5 on my side to Microsoft on your side, Lou, are facing as they want to do business here and really address these growing enterprises that are in these new regions. It's a huge revenue center, and there are going to be accommodations made in the products, and there may be different versions of code shipping in different regions for that very reason.
Right. And I can tell you, like from experience, having different code bases, even talking about forking the code or having different portions of the code be different due to regional requirements is tough. It's tough to do, and it's tough to maintain because you have to have different testing processes for all of them. You have to verify in different environments and different hardware. So I really think that, Apple was almost reluctant to push back a little bit here. But, when there are requirements from government agencies to say, hey, we're not going to allow your devices to come in or even be sold here because of this, it kind of makes sense. Curtis, I want to kind of throw it over to you before we move on. This sounds like almost like Apple kind of rushed to do this to make sure, and they didn't really have a plan for it. So as Brian and you've been saying, hey, like organizations are planning for this. They're knowing that, hey, there's going to be specific new requirements like in the EU or China or in Asia, and we're going to have to kind of appease those types of governments by making hardware changes and software changes. It sounds like Apple wasn't ready. Is this something that they we've seen in the past with them, or because it sounds like enterprise is not really on their forefront here?
Well, I think it's obvious that enterprise really isn't at the forefront of Apple thinking. It's not where they make the bulk of their money, even though they are huge presences in the enterprise through their iDevices and even the Mac. But you're right. This has all the hallmarks of a project where someone said, oh, this will be an easy fix, but they didn't fully think through all the ramifications. And I think everyone who's been involved in tech has seen things like this, where the fix itself is, in fact, pretty simple, but there are just all kinds of ramifications that you need a rigorous testing regimen to work through, find, and take care of.
Right. Well, we'll have to see. I mean, I think like you guys have been saying, organizations need to be ready for this, and they need to have, their CI/CD loops ready to go, and they need to make sure that they have the QA processes in place for be able to handle these types of regions. So we'll see what happens.